We all have members in our family who ended up on the wrong side of history. And when you end up on the wrong side of history, nobody writes yours. This is my great opportunity to learn some of it and to tell some of the story. My name is Scott Tong, and I've just completed a book on China and globalization in my family. It's called A Village with My Name. The way people see China today is often this notion of instant China, that it's a right now story, that China appeared magically in the course of a generation. I think if we look at China as this kind of short-term Big Bang economic story, what we lose is the deeper roots to the story. So members of my family are what I consider kind of cultural middlemen, these Chinese people who are connected to the outside world, and they interacted with these isms of modernity, Marxism, Darwinism, empiricism, Adam Smithism, all of these modern ideas that were new to a lot of Chinese intellectuals. Feminism was a fascinating conversation around the world, in the United States and in China. And my maternal grandmother, her English name is Mildred Zhao, was in the middle of this fascinating feminist conversation that was happening in China. So in 1911, she was 8 years old, and someone in her family decided that her feet would be unbound and that she would go to a school run by American missionaries, middle of nowhere China, Nanchang, Jiangxi province, middle of nowhere China. And her story is this great collision, I think, of women's stories, of these Chinese girls who had this great opportunity to interact with these outside ideas, and these American teachers, these American women who were unsatisfied with the options they had back then, and many of them decided, I'm going to go to China for this adventure. And many of these American teachers, they were going into China as the rest of the foreigners were going out. And during the Japanese occupation of China, my maternal grandfather, Carlton, decided, for reasons we're still coming to understand, that he was going to take a job with the Japanese occupation. And initially, even when I was researching this, I imposed this moral map over this. It was hard to even talk about. My mother said, you can't put this in a book. And then we learned about the individual choices that people make, including the choice that he had to make, and it becomes a grayer story. He went back to his home, got to go back to his hometown and take care of his mother, who was a widow, and his sister-in-law and her children, who was also a widow. He got to work for the division that helped to feed the people during the Japanese occupation. You know, the story gets grayer then. We learned that it was kind of this stalemate. This could have been this prolonged occupation, and everyone is trying to find a way to survive what could have been a long period of the Japanese in control. It was long before the Americans entered the war. And so it becomes even grayer still. So as we learned about what at the individual level collaboration looked like, and spoke to others who were in this situation, and historians who helped to kind of make sense of it, it became something that my mother said, this is an important story that is kind of undertold, and shame covers up a lot of these stories, and it's important to tell. When I first got to China, I got afflicted by what many people get afflicted by, skyscraper syndrome. I went there and I saw what they called the bottle opener at the time, which was the brand new skyscraper building, and I fooled myself into thinking that that was the whole story of China. And it took me a long time before I got to the countryside to see that version of the story. And in my family, that version of the story is in the Tong family village in this forgotten part of northern Jiangsu province, about 4 hours north of Shanghai. And the closest person on my family tree who was there is my third cousin. And my third cousin was cursed for much of his life because of his overseas connections. He had relatives in Taiwan who mailed the letter over from Taiwan, and he paid for it during the Mao era of the Cultural Revolution. And in the modern era, after China opened up, he still had received the worst plot of land in the village. He had the worst opportunities. Basically, he had to stay. And when you stay, you're the loser in the China story. And he had to stay in this place where there's a poem about the water and the pollution, but it starts in the 50s, and by the time you get to the 90s, there's a lot of rates of cancer. And the second time I meet him, he has esophagus cancer. Perhaps because of these reasons, we don't really know. And that's a picture of China right now. that I didn't see for a long time. Kind of the rural side of the story is a starkly different picture from the city story. My family also has the city story. My cousin, so on my father's side, he is this me generation in Shanghai in his 30s, and he drives the vehicle that everybody wants to have. He has a Buick, which is not a joke, right? It has brand cachet, of course, in Shanghai, and but he also was part of a complicated story in China. From the outside, everything looks great. His laptop is sleeker than mine. His camera is bigger and chunkier and more high-tech than mine. But he has a liability in that as he doesn't own property. And he doesn't have the exact right job, white-collar job, and the income to compete in the marriage arms race. And so he, for all of the external blessings that he still has a lot of challenges. And when you speak to a lot of people in urban China and you spend more than a few minutes with them, you realize this is a really common story.